move that the bill be now read a second time.
I move.
Deputy Kenny, you have 20 minutes, and I presume you're sharing?
I'm sharing with Deputy Doherty and Deputy Stanley. Minister, the bill we have before the House tonight is the Local Government Water Pollution Amendment Bill 2018. It's in order to deal with a situation that has developed in many rural areas over the past 7 to 8 years in particular, but even going back further than that, but generally over the past 7 to 8 years, where rural planning permissions have been denied because of the very stringent approach of the EPA guidelines for rural housing. And first of all, I want to at the outset make the point that rural planning permission is not about pollution, is not about damaging the environment or doing anything that would have any negative effect on our water courses, on our drinking water, or anything like that. This bill is designed to enhance the level at which we treat sewage in our rural areas and to ensure that people can live in the rural environment in a safe way, because they also enjoy that environment and they also drink that water, and they want to ensure that it is a safe and adequate place where they can live. The standard of practice that was put in place by the EPA Code of Practice back in, I think it was written in 2009 and came into effect in 2010, basically stated that if the site failed the percolation test, in other words, if the soil was too dense and it failed that test, that the result of that would be what they call zero emissions or zero discharge. In other words, no matter how well the treatment system you had on site treated the effluent, even if it treated it to drinking water standard, you were not allowed to let a cup of that water into the river or into the stream, which was taking it to an extreme that I don't think anyone ever intended to go to. The other part of the guidelines also said that, an alternative to that, you could apply for a wastewater discharge licence. Now, the legislation around that was difficult. But just to go into the detail of what this has done and the effects it has been, the effects of it in places like Leitrim, where almost 90% of the soil will not pass the percolation test, has meant that over the past number of years we have had in many rural parishes where there is no town, where there is no alternative, we've had situations where we can have no planning permission and people have been denied to be able to build a house and to live in their own community where they grew up themselves, to send their children to the school that they went to themselves, to have their children play for the football club that they played for themselves. And that's the effect it has had. It has, if you like, sterilised whole communities and has brought a situation where we have large areas, particularly in County Leitrim, but in other areas in the West as well, where we have rural communities in decline. And, people deserve to be able to live where they choose to live. And most people who want to live in rural Ireland want to do so, as I say, in an environmentally friendly manner. In the vast majority of cases where people are building houses like that, they're building it either on their own land or on family land. So when they don't have to buy a site, they usually put the additional money that they have from the purchase of the house into building a really good quality home, because it's the home they intend to live in for their lives. It's not like a developer that's going to shoot it up quick and turn it on to somebody else. So therefore they build a very good quality home that's really well insulated. In fact, in most cases, when you speak to people in the profession, they'll tell you that most of the one-off rural housing is almost to a passive standard. So, the issues here has had a very negative effect on County Leitrim. It has had the unintended consequence of what the EPA done. And I spoke to people in the EPA when I was putting together this bill. I spoke to people in the environmental section in the county councils, and all of them said that this was not intended. The intention of the EPA when they drew up these guidelines was to improve the standard, not to ban planning. But it has had that effect. And for many years now, and indeed I think it was 2013 that your predecessor Phil Hogan visited County Leitrim, met councillors in Leitrim and said to them, within 6 months we'll come back here with a solution for this, because it's wrong that people can't be able to build a house in rural areas. We have to come up with a solution. We have to ensure that people can live in rural Ireland again. And unfortunately, nothing happened. And we've had reports and we've had assessments, and in fairness to many local authorities, and Leitrim in particular being the most acutely affected, have done an awful lot of work with the EPA, with the department, to try and come up with a solution. And what they were trying to do was come up with a solution that actually produced a zero effluent, a zero discharge. So it meant that it would be going through a treatment plant into a reed bed and a willow bed, and that it would evaporate off any waste that would be left in it. And that waste, as I say, will be treated to a very high standard. But we live in a very damp climate, we live in a very wet country, and it was proven to be practically impossible to do that. Or if it was possible, it was going to be at a very, very high cost. So it wasn't possible to do it. So what we've done here is we looked at the alternative to that. And the alternative to that is to look at the discharge licence. So, Minister, when we look at the discharge licence, at the moment, it's really only available for very large projects or industrial units. So, what this bill intends to do, and the clear intention of this bill, is to allow a local authority to issue a discharge licence for a single house where the treatment of the effluent is treated to the highest standard possible. And the highest standard we're talking about is bathing water standard, and that can be assessed and tested and regulated and stood over by the local authority when they issue the licence. And that would mean that we would not be in any way in conflict with the EPA guidelines, because the EPA guidelines, you can say you can apply for a water discharge licence, and you would be protecting the environment to a new standard, a much higher standard than we actually have at present. The solutions that have been put forward, and I'm aware of your amendment to really kick this can down the road and wait another year or over a year before we come back to assess this again. I'm very sorry to say that just doesn't work for people that have waited for almost 10 years now to get a solution to this problem. We really need to deal with it now, and I'm happy, and we're all happy, to cooperate with yourselves, with the EPA, with the department, to meet whatever requirements they want to meet, to be able to build houses for people and live where they want to be able to live. It's not about a free-for-all, and I want to make that clear. It's not about building thousands of houses across rural Ireland. There have been examples in some seaside resorts where there's been a huge amount of holiday homes built. There's examples of around some towns where there's an awful lot of one-house, half-housing built, and people have pointed to that as a problem. And, excess in one place should not be an excuse for a famine somewhere else. And that's really the point in this, that this is about a small but significant sector of people who want to build houses in their own area and live where they used to live themselves. The solution we have here, and I want to go into this in a little bit of detail, but only for a minute, is really about producing high-quality effluent, where the treatment is regulated and clearly regulated, that nobody will pollute. And I want to make that clear. And it was interesting today when I was on the radio a few times. I got an email from somebody in different parts of the country. One person saying this would be outrageous to pump effluent into the rivers and pollute our rivers. We want to let bathing water standard effluent go into the rivers. That's what we're talking about. Treat it to a very high standard. And many people in urban Ireland have been fed this myth, that rural Ireland has somehow destroyed the environment. The reality is, Minister, and you're well aware of it, and we're all aware of it, and we need to deal with it, that probably up to 30%, I think, at this stage, of sewage produced in many of our towns and villages goes into the rivers and goes into the sea totally untreated. And that's something that needs to be dealt with. And we all want to work with you to deal with that. But wherever people live, they produce waste. And the people who don't live in the rural houses that they can't get planning for now are living in some of those towns and villages where 30% of that sewage is going untreated. So we're offering a solution that helps with that problem rather than hinders the problem. So I have to say I'm disappointed with the amendment that has been put to try and kick this can down the road. I don't think it's appropriate. The notion that the EPA and that all these other agencies should be given another year to produce more reports is, quite frankly, ridiculous at this stage. Every government department in this country has shelves lined with reports covered in dust that have been there for years. And we don't want this to go down that road also. It's time now to deal with this issue. In fairness to Minister English, he has told me that he has been aware of it for many years and that he's been lobbied on it by Leitrim County Council and other councils to get this sorted out. And he says he's on the same page, that he wants a solution here. So if we want a solution here, let's work together and produce that solution. Let's do something which is right for the people and provide a solution that will allow people to simply live in their own communities. That's all they're asking for. And I don't think it's too much to ask a government to cooperate with that and to make that happen and to commit to that. And finally, Minister, I know that sometimes officials in departments, can have a lot of power and can stand in the way of things. But at the end of the day, the Minister is the person that's elected, and the Minister is the person that's in charge. And I would call on you, as the Minister, to stand up for the ordinary people out there who simply want to do the right thing for the environment and the right thing for their families and for their communities. Gormaigh, that's